All right, so if you're looking at this code and you're saying, man, that's a lot of repetitive code with those two console logs, I would say that I agree with you, and there's got to be a better way. Remember the idea, don't repeat yourself. Dry, D-R-Y. If you see yourself repeating yourself, find another way to do it. So what I would offer is this then. Let's create a function. Let me create a function. See if I can bring that over here to the table. So let's create a function down here at the bottom, and we're going to call it describe character. And the idea here is that I'm going to send Aurora, in this case, the variable, into this function. It's going to return a value that we will console log. So it's going to return this string, and let's just, so I'll walk us through this whole process here. So instead of console logging here, what we're going to do is we're going to call that function describe, and we're going to send Aurora. So recognize that we are sending an object to our function. So we're sending this entire piece into this variable character. So now that this function has all of this information, it can print out the name, the health, and the strength as it stands at that point in time. So then, let's see, so I can console out that one, and then Aurora's health changed, and so, and her strength changed, and then we did a console log. So if I comment that out, and then call the function again, describe and send Aurora. So I should be getting the same thing, but hopefully what you're seeing is this is more efficient code because I'm calling a function instead of writing that literal over and over again. So let's just see what happens. So I saved it. I'm going to hit my, and nothing happened. Well, okay, I forgot an important piece. Let's see what that was. So if I had, instead of using the word return here, let's use the word console.log like we did above. And I'm going to put open and close curly braces. So there we go. My mouse is jumping all over for some reason. I have too much open or some silliness. All right, so now if I come in and run that again, it should print out. All right, perfect. So now it's doing what we thought it would do. So it is printing out our changes. So at the moment in time that we called the function, we sent Aurora, the state at that point in time is what we call it. So before the first time, and it was 150 and 25, we made some changes to the property values. We sent the object with the new values, got sent into our function, and therefore the new values printed out. All right. So then I had this thing in here instead called return. And so what return will do is, instead of console logging it right then and there, we can return this string back to the function that called it. In other words, I could put this into a variable, what got returned. I don't know what else to put in here, just what got returned from function. Hopefully this isn't really the variable name I would use, but it's just to try and give you a visual. And so then I would console log what got returned from the function. So hopefully what you're seeing is the function is actually returning some information, and then I'm console logging it. So I can get that information and put it into a variable. I could, for simplicity, I could also, I'm going to keep this in here just so you have it for a visual. I could instead just console log that which got returned. So if I just did this, that's also doing the same thing. So I'm going to do that here, console.log, and then return whatever gets returned. Let's console log that. So again, we're getting the same thing. So just different ways to do things, just trying to give you an idea of what can be done. This is getting confusing. I've got a whole bunch of stuff going on here. So for clarity, I'm going to kind of delete some of our comments, just so we can kind of keep track of what's going on. All right, so we call this procedural programming. So procedural programming is where we call a function that exists in our code and we send it some data, okay? But we're doing object-oriented programming here now, where we want to run everything from an object. We want to utilize our object's strengths and weaknesses, for a little pun there. So I give you this as a familiarity, but really don't want to do it this way. Oh, here she goes again. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to actually put this function inside of our object. Remember, an object has properties, but an object also has methods, things that it can do. So I'm going to put a comma here, and I'm going to pretty much replicate what we just did with a copy and paste, ideally. And I will explain what we're doing. All right, so within Aurora, our object, I now have a method. This is something that this object can do. And so this object can return its name, it can return its health, and it can return its strength. Okay, a little bit different. So here's how that works. So here we had to call an external function in order to run, and we had to send it Aurora. So now we're going to turn this upside down, and what we're going to do instead is console.log, same scenario there, but this time we're going to run Aurora's function. So I'm going to type the word Aurora, just like we did before, where we would do Aurora and we used a dot, but we typed in her property. This time we're going to type in her method. What can she do? And a method requires parentheses. And so I'm going to comment out this console log just so we can see this working, because I don't have a function anymore. All right, so now let's run this and see what happens. Aurora has 150 health points and 25 as strength. So it seemed to work, but why? Let's get rid of the word points, just so we can prove that. I'm going to get rid of as. I just want to prove that it ran from here. So let's do it one more time. All right, so it's definitely running this function. But how did it know what value to print out? Because this method is part of this object, anything in here, if we use the word this, that says use my properties name, and my being the object that you're running this from. So this method says run Aurora's name. That's what this refers to. This is myself. So refer to, and the reason why we do that is, let's say I had something like a new variable in here, a temporary variable. So if I set this to string or something like that, and I just put the word a temp in here, it would refer to a temp var. Okay, so now I'm just referring to the variable that exists within this method. But I don't want to refer to the variable that exists inside this method. Let's just go ahead and run this so you can see that that's working. Okay, so it said string, so it's definitely running this. If I put in name by itself, the JavaScript interpreter is going to look for a variable here within this function called name. Let me prove that that will make an error. So yes, I got an error. Name is not defined. So what we have to tell the JavaScript browser is name is a property of this object. And so I have to use the word this here. So look into this object's, which is Aurora's, properties to find the value I'm looking for here. And so now if I run that, it should work. There we go. So let's create another, I'm going to I'm going to put this on pause and clear up some of my real estate. And we're going to create another character, and we'll demonstrate this all in action. All right, I'm going to put this on pause. I'll be right back. All right, so in my quick break, I cleaned up the code. So I can kind of clean up things and so it's not so confusing. So I have an object, and her name is Aurora. And Aurora has a name, a health, a strength, and a describe method. So she has this constant, this variable has properties with values, and it has a method which will return a string that prints out this object's name, this object's health, and this object's strength. Okay, and that's what console log would do. I have another object which I called Odin, and this object also has a name, it has a health, and it has a strength, and it has a describe. So it's very similar to Aurora. And so if I do console.log and we type out Odin's.describe method, we'll get a little bit of information about Odin. And I hit my arrow up key and I got an error because, so here's where you see your errors. Odin is not defined. I think we've seen that already. Index line 28. Index line 28 says it doesn't understand the word Odin because I did that, spelled it wrong. So control save that and we'll index, and there we go. So you can see that both of our objects are working and both of them have a describe method that tells us something about them. All right. So now what I'm going to do is shake this up some more and put together two concepts now that we've been working on. So we've been working on arrays and we've been working on objects. So I'm going to create an array of characters. And in my array of characters, my data is going to be my objects. One is Aurora and one is Odin. So I have an array that has two values, two datas, and the data types are objects. So I have all of this information, for lack of a better way to word that, inside my array. And let's see how that plays out. So if I do console log and I console log out chars or characters, let me do a clear just so I can CLS. And then let's do node index and let's see what prints out. So if I look at what we've got going on here, what we're seeing is, and this is something you've got to get used to reading. At first it looks scary, but let's break it down. What got printed out? Well, first of all, we can see an array got printed out because we can see the open and close bracket. We can see that there's an object, so with separated by a comma, and another object, so we can see that we have two elements in our array. And we know that because they're separated by the comma. And then each of those elements in our array is an object, and we can see that with our curly braces. And this object has a property of name, health, strength, and a function. It says a function of describe, and those are the values. And it has another object which also has, coincidentally, the same things. They don't have to be the same things, but let's not go there. All right, so in our we saw how we can loop through arrays. So let's loop through our arrays to print out our values. All right, so before we tackle that, let's just make sure we understand what we're looking at here. Let's say I wanted to print out Aurora's name. And Aurora is the first element in this array. So if I typed out if we type, that's element number 0. Sorry, I was trying to keep track of where I was at. All right, so let's do chars of 0. And let's see what we get there. So chars of 0 is going to give me just Aurora's object because 0 is the first element in this array. And so now I just want to get at her name. So if I get at her name, all I need to use is the dot name property. And so now I should get just Aurora's name. Perfect. If I wanted to print out, use Aurora's function, I could do the same thing by using describe. And that's a function, so I need to, or a method, its method is an object as a method, so I know that I confuse those a lot, and I apologize. In essence, they're doing the same thing, where it's a statement, it's a bunch of statements that our object can do. It's called a method. Anyway, so I'm going to print out Aurora's describe method, and that should describe her, which it does. If I wanted to do the same thing from Odin, then obviously that would be element number 1. So I could print out element number 1, which is 0, 1 of the chars array. And once I have that object in my grip, I'll run that object's method. And then, so now we have Odin's. All right, so now what we'll do is we're going to loop through our array of chars. And as we're looping through that array, we're going to print out each object's name. So to loop through an array, we're going to use our for loop for var I equals 0, I less than the length of our array, which is, our array is chars.length. We use the length property to return how many elements are in that array. And then I plus plus. And so now, what have we got? Well, I'm not really sure. So let's do this. Let's console log chars and chars of I, right? Because we're looping through the for loop. And each time we loop through the for loop, our I is changing. And so the first time it's going to be chars of 0. The second time it's going to be chars of 1, which is what we just saw up above. So let's go ahead and run that, and let's see what we have. So the first time that loop ran through, we have chars of 0, which is this entire object. The second time through the loop, the second iteration of the for loop, we've got this object, which is chars of 1. So now we can use our dot notation in order to drill down into the individual properties of each of those objects. Chars of 0 dot name, for example, chars of 1 dot name. So I can use dot name, and I'm going to verify that I do have Aurora and Odin in there. Perfect. I can also use each of those objects' methods, so I can do describe. And if I do that, then I should get a description of each of those objects. Let me move that away from here so that's not ugly. Okay, and now I get those descriptions. So now we are getting really fancy. We are creating objects. We're putting those objects into our array. We're looping through an array that is pulling out information from our objects. All right, see you in the next video.